is looking to fundamentally restructure the international trading system. And just yesterday, he announced a pause on what is called a global set of reciprocal tariffs for all countries but China.
The world just changed, and Washington was caught asleep at the wheel. Canada just fired the first shot in a full-scale economic war, cutting off the minerals Tesla and the entire U.S. auto industry needs to survive. What's happening? It started with a signature and a smirk. President Donald Trump launched one of his most aggressive trade moves yet, a 25% tariff on Canadian auto exports. To Washington, it was economic muscle. To Ottawa, it was war. But Canada didn't blink. New Prime Minister Mark Carney struck back with precision. In a matter of hours, supply chains froze, factories stalled, and panic swept Wall Street. Meanwhile, China is moving in, Europe is pulling back, and America is being boxed out of the global auto game. One brutal trade deal at a time. Is this how the United States loses its factories, its allies, and its last grip on global power, targeting electric vehicles, battery minerals, and cross-border parts? It wasn't just retaliation, it was strategy. Carney, a global finance veteran, knew how to cut deep. His tariffs hit swing states, factory towns, and the voters Trump promised to protect. The message was sharp. Canada wouldn't be pushed around. Within days, trade routes clogged, ports slowed, supply chains cracked. The world's most integrated auto partnership began to unravel. American automakers scrambled. What was supposed to be a bold U.S. tariff became an industrial crisis. And Canada, for the first time in modern history, wasn't following. It was leading, and this time it wasn't backing down. As the supply chain buckled and automakers panicked, another player stepped onto the stage, not to negotiate, but to replace America entirely. Make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next will blindside Washington. Tesla's supply chain collapses overnight. The most critical blow came in the form of restricted access to battery minerals. Tesla sources a significant percentage of its nickel, aluminum, and lithium from Canadian suppliers, materials that are not just important, but irreplaceable in the short term. With new tariffs driving up costs and slowing shipments, Tesla was faced with a devastating dilemma: pay more, wait longer, or halt production. The impact was immediate. Factories slowed. Battery assembly lines in Nevada and California fell behind schedule. Delivery estimates stretched out by weeks, then months. For a company built on speed, innovation, and investor confidence, the delay was catastrophic. Stock prices trembled as analysts sounded the alarm. Tesla, once viewed as the untouchable champion of American electric vehicle manufacturing, was now exposed. Investors began asking hard questions. How could a single policy change from Canada destabilize a multi-billion-dollar automaker? The answer was simple: dependence. Tesla had built its empire on a foundation that required cooperation. Canadian miners, smelters, and transporters were just as essential to Elon Musk's dream as his factories and software. And Canada knew it. In Ottawa, the move was celebrated as a master stroke of strategic retaliation. Rather than simply punishing America broadly, Prime Minister Carney had pinpointed a company that symbolized American innovation and pride, and used it as leverage. As prices surged, Tesla was forced to make cuts. New models were delayed. Some orders were canceled outright. Musk remained defiant on social media. But internally, Tesla executives began scrambling for alternative sources, knowing full well that even temporary disruptions could unravel years of progress. And while Tesla burned, the fire spread. The dealership breakdown: why American auto sales just died. It wasn't just Tesla feeling the heat. Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis were hit just as hard, if not harder, by Canada's retaliation. But their pain looked different. It was not about high-tech batteries or futuristic supply chains. It was about the dealership network. From Texas to Michigan, American auto dealerships began reporting delays, part shortages, and unexpected pricing hikes. Vehicles that were once on showroom floors within days were now taking weeks to arrive. Even basic service appointments began to back up. As replacement parts became scarce, the dealership network, the backbone of American auto retail, started to crack. With each shipment delay from Canada, the pressure mounted. Ford dealers couldn't get transmissions. GM service centers ran out of diagnostic chips. Stellantis dealers found themselves with half-stocked lots and no explanation to give angry customers. In small towns and suburbs across the country, the crisis became visible. Consumers who had saved up for new trucks and SUVs found themselves waiting indefinitely. Meanwhile, prices skyrocketed as supply dried up. The average cost of a new car jumped by over 15% in just a matter of weeks, pricing millions of Americans out of the market altogether. Worse still, the used car market exploded. Vehicles that once depreciated year by year were now appreciating. A 2-year-old truck was suddenly worth more than a new one. simply because it was available. The chaos was not just financial. It was psychological. Consumers lost confidence, dealers lost sales. And for the first time in a generation, Americans began asking a question few thought they would ask. Is buying American still worth it? Meanwhile, in Ottawa, the answer was clear. The strategy was working. The United States had underestimated Canada. And now, the new Prime Minister was about to deliver his most devastating move yet. How Canada weaponized the border. Under Mark Carney's leadership, Canada took an approach the U.S. never expected. Rather than attacking directly, Carney subtly disrupted the systems and norms that made American dominance possible. He did not scream into microphones. He pulled strings. Border inspections were intensified. Automotive parts were subject to new scrutiny. Small regulatory delays added up. Warehouses in Windsor, Ontario held onto shipments longer. Ports in Vancouver adjusted schedules. Trucks waited. And as the border slowed, so did the American economy. Supply chains designed for speed began to buckle under the weight of bureaucracy. It wasn't illegal, it wasn't even technically hostile, but it was effective. Carney coupled this strategy with a public diplomacy campaign that painted Canada not as a villain, but as a victim, standing up for itself. In speeches across Europe and Asia, he framed the dispute as a defense of rules-based trade against American bullying, and the world listened. Suddenly, Canada became a symbol of fair trade. The U.S. looked reckless, emotional, and short-sighted. Foreign investors took notice. European carmakers started rethinking their North American strategies. Asian battery suppliers explored new partnerships north of the border. And perhaps most shockingly, Canadian policies began to attract interest from U.S. states desperate to escape the chaos. Governors from Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania opened quiet back channels to Ottawa, asking if exemptions or localized trade deals could be arranged. In that moment, Carney had not just retaliated, he had redefined the balance of power. What began as a routine tariff war had now become something far more dangerous. It was no longer about parts and percentages. It was about pride, strategy, and geopolitical alignment. And as the first month of the trade standoff came to a close, one thing was clear. The United States had been outmaneuvered by its closest ally, Trump's trade trap. Donald Trump was never known for subtlety, and when Canada hit the U.S. auto industry with strategic tariffs, he hit back with twice the force. With executive orders and rally-stage bluster, Trump expanded tariffs across Canadian raw materials and slapped a new wave of restrictions on imported parts. But he did not stop there. He unveiled a sweeping Made in America mandate designed to force U.S. automakers to cut foreign reliance and shift their supply chains back home. To Trump's base, it sounded like a patriotic masterstroke. But to economists and auto executives, it was a nightmare wrapped in a flag. American manufacturing was simply not prepared to absorb that kind of shift. Domestic supply chains were already stretched thin. Labor costs were rising, and factories lacked the capacity to scale up quickly. Suddenly, automakers found themselves caught in a costly transition with no off-ramp. Tariffs on Canadian aluminum, nickel, and lithium shot prices upward. New compliance costs flooded in from the sourcing mandates. Assembly lines slowed, procurement delays piled up, and vehicles once destined for showroom floors were now stuck half-finished in warehouses waiting on parts. What Trump framed as a win for American jobs quickly turned into a corporate triage zone. Wall Street reacted swiftly. Stocks for Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis tumbled. Credit agencies began downgrading forecasts. And as production slowed, foreign competitors seized the opening, selling cheaper, fully built alternatives with fewer restrictions. America's hold on its own market was slipping, and fast. Instead of protecting the auto sector, Trump had walked it into a trap, and it was only a matter of time before the casualties began to mount. As the pressure builds on corporate boardrooms and union leaders alike, the chaos moves from policy papers to factory floors. The factory shutdown spiral begins. In Michigan, the silence inside Ford's Flat Rock plant said it all. Conveyor belts halted, doors locked, workers sent home indefinitely. It was not just Ford. Across Ohio, Indiana, Missouri, and Illinois, plant managers announced sweeping layoffs and indefinite shutdowns. The ripple effect of Trump's tariffs had become a tidal wave. Ford was the first to blink. Facing skyrocketing costs for Canadian-sourced battery materials, they paused EV production in 3 major facilities. General Motors quickly followed, scaling back operations in Lordstown and Lansing, citing unfavorable market conditions and supply chain disruptions. Stellantis, once the silent giant, issued pink slips to thousands in Belvedere, warning that the plant's future was under review. It was not just the major brands. Smaller contract manufacturers, the ones who build parts like seats, dashboards, and wiring harnesses, began to fold. These firms depended on volume, and volume was disappearing by the day. A plant in Dayton laid off over 700 workers. A supplier in Grand Rapids shut down completely. The auto ecosystem was unraveling, and with each announcement, the media blitzed local headlines. Union leaders tried to organize responses, but even they were paralyzed by the speed of the collapse. Trump's trade strategy had not just backfired, it had triggered a chain reaction that no single executive or agency could stop. In swing states that formed the spine of the American auto industry, factory towns went dark, cafes closed, apartment vacancies soared. Pickup trucks with rusted tailgates and unpaid notes began to pile up in dealership lots. The political consequences were on the horizon, but first came the human cost. And for working-class families already living paycheck to paycheck, the shutdowns were a death sentence. From the factory floor to the showroom, the next wave of damage hit the American consumer directly. Consumers pay the price. By late spring, car buyers across America were experiencing something they had not felt in years: panic. It started in Texas, where Ford dealers began adding $5,000 to sticker prices overnight. In California, used EVs were selling for more than new ones. In Florida, luxury car lots were sitting empty, waiting for inventory stuck in limbo. The cause was clear, with tariffs choking the flow of critical parts and factory closures slowing production. Automakers could not meet demand, and when supply dries up, prices explode. The average price of a new vehicle in the U.S. crossed $50,000 for the first time. Used car prices surged past $32,000. Even basic maintenance costs skyrocketed. Oil changes that once cost $50 now pushed past $100. Replacement parts, when available, were delayed by months and marked up by triple digits. Consumers were forced into impossible decisions. Families put off buying new vehicles. Ride-sharing apps saw record sign-ups from people selling cars they could no longer afford. Auto repair shops began turning away customers due to part shortages. It was not just about transportation. These vehicles were lifelines for workers, single parents, rural families, and small business owners. And when the price of a car doubles, so does the pressure on everything else. Inflation, already a hot-button issue, now had a new poster child: the American auto market. In Washington, officials scrambled for damage control. But in Middle America, the damage was already done. And in the places where Trump once drew massive crowds promising to bring the auto industry back, the backlash was already brewing. The MAGA backlash. It started quietly, a protest outside a shuttered plant in Bowling Green, a viral video from a laid-off worker in Toledo, a Facebook group of unemployed welders from Indiana asking a painful question: what happened to America first? Then it went national. Fox News segments began airing interviews with Trump voters who now felt betrayed. Talk radio exploded with calls from factory workers, many of whom had voted Republican their entire lives, who now faced foreclosure, missed payments, and health insurance lapses. Swing states like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, once Trump strongholds, became ground zero for working-class rage. A town hall in Lansing turned into a shouting match. In rural Kentucky, conservative pastors used Sunday sermons to question whether their communities had been sacrificed for political gain. The backlash was not ideological, it was survival. These were people who had placed their faith in Trump's promises of reshoring jobs and reviving industry. Instead, they saw their plants shut down, their paychecks disappear, and their futures grow dimmer. Trump responded the only way he knew how: deflection. He blamed Canada. He blamed Elon Musk. He blamed Democrats. But the excuses were not enough. For the first time in years, his base was not just frustrated, they were furious. And that fury was beginning to translate into something far more dangerous than protest signs or angry tweets. It was turning into political abandonment. With the working class in revolt and the auto economy in free fall, the stage was set for a deeper collapse, one that could reshape the political and economic future of the United States. Canada's secret weapon: energy exports as economic leverage. Energy has long been the invisible thread tying the economies of the United States and Canada together. Oil pipelines snake across borders. Electricity grids are seamlessly connected, and billions of dollars in energy flow north to south each year without disruption. But now, amid a widening trade war and escalating political tensions, that quiet dependence has become a ticking time bomb. Canada has not yet fully weaponized its energy exports. but it no longer needs to. The mere threat of restricting oil, natural gas, or hydroelectricity has been enough to shake Washington to its core. Canada is the single largest foreign supplier of oil to the United States, accounting for nearly half of all American crude imports. If that tap were to be squeezed even slightly, the impact on gas prices would be immediate and catastrophic. Gasoline costs, already rising from supply chain disruptions, would skyrocket overnight. This would ripple through the economy, raising shipping costs, inflating consumer prices, and potentially dragging the Federal Reserve into a monetary policy panic. And oil is only the beginning. Canada is also a major supplier of electricity to northern U.S. states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota. These regions rely on Canadian hydroelectric power to keep their grids running, especially during peak demand seasons. If Canada were to cut or even threaten to reduce electricity exports, blackouts would become a real possibility, especially in densely populated urban centers. Mark Carney, Canada's new Prime Minister, has played his cards carefully. While he has not announced any energy sanctions, his administration has been deliberately vague in public statements, allowing the uncertainty itself to serve as leverage. In recent press conferences, Canadian officials have spoken openly about diversifying energy partners, signaling that they may prioritize exports to European or Asian markets instead. As energy fears spread, another sector of the U.S. economy begins to buckle under pressure, one that feeds every household and builds every home. Immigration crackdown wrecks U.S. farming and manufacturing. President Trump's aggressive new immigration policies have added fuel to the fire of economic instability in a bid to crack down on undocumented labor and restore what he calls lawful American employment. Mass deportation efforts have accelerated across the country. But while the rhetoric may win political points, the real-world consequences are wreaking havoc on the very industries Trump vowed to protect. Nowhere is the damage more evident than in American agriculture. The U.S. farming system has relied on migrant labor, primarily from Mexico and Central America, to harvest crops, tend livestock, and perform the grueling work that few American citizens are willing to do. As deportation sweeps intensify and work visas become harder to obtain, entire farming regions are facing an existential crisis. Fields once brimming with workers now sit idle. Crops rot under the sun. Farmers are forced to abandon harvests because there are simply not enough hands to gather them. In states like California, Georgia, and Arizona, the labor shortage has reached critical mass. Some farms are shutting down permanently, while others are shifting to less labor-intensive crops, which only reduces output and profit margins further. But the impact does not stop at the farm. The entire food supply chain feels the ripple effect. With less produce entering the market, prices surge. Grocery stores pass those costs to consumers, and inflation accelerates yet again. Meanwhile, the manufacturing sector, which Trump has championed as the backbone of a revitalized America, is also suffering. Immigrant workers, both legal and undocumented, make up a vital portion of factory labor across the Midwest and South. With deportations rising and fewer workers available, production lines are grinding to a halt. What was meant to be a campaign for American job security has become a trigger for economic disruption. And as farms and factories falter, another long-standing issue erupts. The United States is running out of skilled workers. The labor crisis that no one planned for. There is a silent catastrophe unfolding across the American economy. It is not driven by a single policy, a single president, or a single trade war. It is the result of decades of demographic neglect, education failures, and a culture that has devalued trade skills. It is a labor crisis, and it is only getting worse. For years, experts warned that the skilled labor force in America was aging out. Plumbers, electricians, welders, machine operators, and HVAC technicians were all nearing retirement, and there were not enough young workers to replace them. Those warnings were largely ignored. Today, the effects are impossible to miss. Job postings in trades and construction have surged, but few applicants are qualified. Apprenticeship programs exist, but enrollment is low. Many young Americans have been funneled into college degrees that do not translate into marketable skills. The result is a paradox. Millions of open jobs and millions of unemployed or underemployed workers. Yet the gap only widens. Construction firms delay projects for months due to lack of workers. Manufacturing plants operate at partial capacity. Public infrastructure projects stall. Every sector that depends on skilled hands is now facing bottlenecks. And with immigration restrictions tightening, there is no backfill from abroad. The workers who once helped stabilize the labor market are gone. The policies that were supposed to boost employment have instead helped accelerate a collapse. The cultural perception of blue-collar work has only made things worse. For a generation raised to believe that success only comes from a 4-year degree, vocational training was treated like a last resort. Now that stigma is costing the country dearly. This is not a crisis that can be solved overnight. Even with rapid investment in trade education, it will take years to train a new workforce. In the meantime, companies will lose contracts, cities will delay repairs, and economic growth will slow. And if that sounds bad, it is about to get worse. Because now, with wages stagnant, debt rising, and essential goods inflating beyond reach, America's middle class is approaching the point of no return. Middle class collapse begins. In the heart of America's suburbs, the unthinkable is happening. The middle class, once the bedrock of economic stability and political moderation, is being squeezed to the breaking point. Layoffs are mounting, household debt is climbing, wages are flat, and the cost of living is spiraling out of control. It is not just the latest economic downturn, this is the culmination of overlapping crises. Trade wars, energy instability, labor shortages, and policy missteps have created a perfect storm. And for millions of families, there is no safety net left. Mortgage payments are rising as interest rates climb. Credit card balances are ballooning as households try to keep up with inflated grocery and gas bills. Medical expenses are higher. Rent has soared in cities and even in rural areas. Everywhere, the squeeze is on. Job security, once taken for granted in industries like auto manufacturing, construction, and agriculture, has evaporated. Employers are cutting hours, freezing raises, or outright laying off workers. Families that once considered themselves comfortable are suddenly one emergency away from financial ruin. Confidence is collapsing. Consumer sentiment indexes are plummeting. People are no longer planning for vacations or new cars. They are trying to figure out how to pay for groceries. The idea of upward mobility is being replaced by survival anxiety. Small businesses, too, are facing unprecedented stress. They cannot afford to raise wages enough to keep workers, yet costs keep rising. Many are shutting down altogether, unable to survive the dual assault of inflation and workforce shortages. The ripple effects are undeniable. With less spending power, demand drops. As demand drops, more layoffs follow. It is a feedback loop of decline, and without swift systemic intervention, it threatens to become the new normal. This is not just a political challenge. It is a generational one. The middle class is not just vanishing, it is being erased from the economy. And as confidence disappears and recession fears grow, the collapse spreads from homes and jobs to the very foundation of American power. China makes its move. As the trade war between the United States and Canada intensifies, another player is quietly stepping into the spotlight. China, long regarded as a looming threat in the global economic arena, is now moving swiftly to take advantage of America's unraveling relationships with its neighbors. While Washington remains locked in a tit-for-tat tariff battle with Ottawa, Beijing is making strategic inroads into North America by signing critical supply and trade agreements with both Canada and Mexico. And if left unchecked, these moves could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the global auto industry. The stakes are monumental. China has already secured large-scale contracts for lithium, nickel, cobalt, and aluminum from Canadian mining companies, the very minerals that power electric vehicle batteries. With the United States locked out of these deals due to tariff retaliation and political fallout, China is setting up a supply chain that runs through North America without needing American approval. The effect? Chinese companies now have preferential access to critical resources that once fueled Tesla, Ford, and General Motors. But China is not stopping at resources. It is also investing in new electric vehicle assembly plants in northern Mexico. These facilities, strategically positioned near the U.S. border, are designed to take advantage of the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, allowing Chinese-made vehicles to enter the American market without the tariffs typically associated with direct imports. By embedding itself in Mexican production and Canadian resources, China has effectively sidestepped the barriers Trump hoped to erect. American trade policy, meant to punish China, is now ironically helping it thrive. Chinese automakers like BYD, NIO, and Geely are poised to flood the North American market with competitively priced EVs. Meanwhile, American firms struggle with disrupted supply chains, rising costs, and weakening consumer trust. China is not just gaining ground. It is building a new foundation for long-term dominance. This is no longer a battle at the border. It is a chess game. And China is 5 moves ahead. Europe walks away. While the United States contends with trade retaliation from Canada and industrial encroachment by China, another silent shift is taking place across the Atlantic. Europe, once a stable partner and major importer of American goods, is rethinking its entire economic strategy. Countries like Germany, France, and the United Kingdom have watched the escalating trade tensions between North American powers with growing concern, and they are making changes. Historically, American-made vehicles and technologies had strong footing in European markets. Ford Europe, Jeep, and Tesla enjoyed considerable success on the continent, supported by favorable trade ties and a shared commitment to transatlantic stability. But that trust has been shattered as protectionist policies tighten and manufacturing instability rises in the U.S. European nations are beginning to turn inward and, more alarmingly, outward toward alternative trade partners. Germany, with its massive automotive sector, has started forming closer alliances with South Korea and Japan for EV innovation and parts sourcing. France is building a domestic battery industry to reduce reliance on imports entirely. The United Kingdom, post-Brexit and eager to stabilize its economy, has redirected investment flows towards Scandinavian tech hubs and Southeast Asian supply chains. The United States, once the epicenter of global innovation, is increasingly seen as unpredictable, unstable, and hostile to international cooperation. One of the clearest signs of this shift is the quiet withdrawal of American auto brands from European showrooms. Dealers are reporting declining interest in U.S.-branded EVs due to delayed shipments, regulatory hurdles, and rising costs driven by American tariffs. European consumers, already wary of political polarization in the U.S., are opting for more reliable Asian and European alternatives. And with each canceled shipment or terminated partnership, the U.S. loses more than just money. It loses trust. This exodus is not about ideology, it is about survival. European governments are hedging their bets, preparing for a future where America no longer plays a central economic role. And if the current trajectory continues, that future might arrive sooner than anyone expected. The global auto realignment. As the U.S. auto sector reels from political backlash, tariff wars, and supply chain chaos, 2 countries are quietly taking the lead: Japan and South Korea. While American automakers bicker with Washington and scramble to source materials, Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, and Kia are executing a global strategy years in the making, one built on stability, localized manufacturing, and global trust. Unlike their American counterparts, Japanese and South Korean car makers have long embraced hybrid models alongside full EVs. This approach has proven far more resilient in an era of battery shortages and raw material inflation. Toyota, for example, has doubled down on hybrid technology in the U.S. market, offering vehicles that meet environmental regulations without relying entirely on volatile battery components. Consumers, facing rising EV sticker prices, are responding in droves. South Korea's Hyundai and Kia have gone even further by investing billions in U.S.-based manufacturing facilities. By producing vehicles domestically, they bypass many of the political risks plaguing American firms. And because their vehicles qualify for government tax credits and face none of the backlash associated with offshoring, they are now perceived as the more American choice by many U.S. consumers. Meanwhile, Japan continues to leverage its long-standing trade relationships with both Canada and Mexico. This means uninterrupted access to critical components and tariff-free production chains that American firms can no longer rely on. With reliability, price control, and brand loyalty on their side, Japanese and South Korean automakers are rapidly expanding their market share in the very territory American companies are retreating from. This is not just a temporary win. It is a long-term realignment. Japan and South Korea are not filling a gap. They are building a new auto empire on U.S. soil, one that is increasingly independent of American leadership. And for every American job lost due to shutdowns and trade wars, another is created in a Hyundai, Toyota, or Kia factory. The global balance of auto power is shifting. End of the empire. Is U.S. auto dominance dead forever? With China embedding itself in North American trade, Europe cutting ties, and Asia rising fast, The question becomes unavoidable. Is this the end of American auto dominance? The warning signs are all there. Domestic factories are shuttering, loyal customers are defecting, allies are turning their backs, and competitors are not just winning, they are building new ecosystems in America's backyard. The pillars that once held up the U.S. auto empire are crumbling, and no one in Washington seems to have a plan to stop it. Trump's protectionist policies, while popular with his political base, have had the opposite effect economically. Instead of reshoring jobs, tariffs have driven production costs up, forced companies to seek offshore alternatives, and made American vehicles less competitive. The Biden-era subsidies and EV mandates have also fallen short, creating a fragmented, overly regulated market that many automakers are struggling to navigate. Meanwhile, the world is moving on. Canada has proven it will no longer be pushed around. Mexico has become a new hub for Asian and European automakers. China is bypassing restrictions and forming North American partnerships. And Europe has quietly exited the American supply chain altogether. In the vacuum left behind, new alliances are taking shape, alliances that do not include the United States. This is not just an economic failure, it is a strategic one. America spent decades building its dominance through innovation, diplomacy, and reliable trade. But now, each policy misstep, each diplomatic insult, and each economic shock chips away at that legacy. The world is watching, and more importantly, it is adapting. So what comes next? Can America rebound, or is it already too late? The answer depends on what U.S. leadership does in the next few months. Without a coordinated national strategy to stabilize trade, restore trust with allies, and support domestic production, the decline will accelerate. But with bold action, targeted investment, smarter trade deals, and a commitment to industrial rebuilding, there may still be time to turn the tide. One thing is clear: the rest of the world is not waiting. If America continues down this path, the question will not be whether U.S. auto dominance is over. It will be how long before the world forgets it ever existed. The world isn't waiting for America to catch up. It's moving on. If this collapse caught you off guard, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next shock, and let us know in the comments. Can U.S. auto power be saved, or is it already too late?